It
which
really
is
was no miracle. What happened was just this. The wind began to switch, the house to pitch, and suddenly the hinges going to unhitch. Just then, the witch. I mean, like, just
yeah,
come
and it's
on.
catchy.
The musical stim. It's like so satisfying.
Tori, thank you so, so much for joining me. It is so great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
We
so
were
good to finally talk to
I
each other.
know. We were talking like I think you were one of the first people I followed on TikTok. I think I'm one of the first people you followed. So
Yes.
we go back to those early days, which is really 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 great. And I said this to you before. It's been so amazing seeing you grow and explode and just like develop this incredible fan base that you have now, and just the places it's taken you. We're going to get into, which I'm sure has just been absolutely life changing for you. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So, with that being said, I do want to kind of go back to the beginning, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, and that's why The Wizard of Oz? What's that moment that you became obsessed with it? And I know for you, that's an interesting story because I know there's a lot of emotion and trauma tied to actually the beginning of your Oz journey. But I'm wondering if you feel comfortable sharing that, but specifically also just kind of talking about how it became has become that source of comfort for you.
Yeah, it was kind of traumatic. And I was about 2 years old. My maternal grandfather passed away, and 2 weeks later, our house burned. And so we went to stay with my grandmother while our house was being repaired. And she happened to have the 50th anniversary copy of the VHS tape of The Wizard of Oz. And she asked my mother if she could show it to us. And I don't remember any of this firsthand. I was only 2 years old. But my mother said, "Oh, I don't know. The kids might find it scary." My mom had always found it scary. And grandma's like, "Oh, they'll be fine." So we watched it, and I mean, just absolutely hooked from day one, from what the legends say. And when we left Grandma's house, I took that VHS tape with me. And ever since, I've used The Wizard of Oz as kind of a coping mechanism during hard times in life. When I put that film on, automatic comfort and release and joy and safety. You cling on to Oz at first for the bright colors and beautiful music, and you stay for those more adult themes of found family and, self-actualization.
I know you say, you were told a lot of that secondhand, but is there anything visceral from that first moment of seeing Oz, or at least around those early days of seeing Oz that you remember that does stick out for you
Oh
at that
yeah.
time?
I remember, at tough times at home, I would pretend that my closet was the gateway to Oz, and I would crawl into my closet and pretend that I was coming out on the other side on the yellow brick road. And, then I started collecting, and that feeling of surrounding myself with this beautiful film that I love so much just gave me this blanket of comfort that other hobbies that I've had throughout life just haven't provided that same level. So, yeah, the visceral feeling of just safety and this place that I recognized, even though I'd never been there before.
That's a yeah, great point. We're going to get into some of your collection, obviously, in a little bit here, but I wonder if you can draw a connection, or if you've observed this of, with Wicked coming out over the last couple of years, spread out, and just with everything going on in the world, I can see a comparison of people also finding Oz again through. Whether it's the collective we experiencing trauma, but I wonder if you can also speak to it personally of kind of Oz in the trauma that is today, and what that's been like to experience.
I think we all feel a bit like we've been picked up by a twister and dropped someplace that we don't recognize, that feels very dangerous and unknown. And Wicked specifically speaks so much to fascism and to fighting the powers that be and finding a way to fight the powers that be in a way that works, even though that might not always be the conventional route. And I think the experiences of Elphaba and Glinda and their different ways of trying to make change, and then, all of us trying to find ways to make change in our own ways, to follow those yellow brick roads on our own and try to find the collective we at the end. I think that's what speaks to this moment right now, for sure, very loud and clear.
Oh, Tori, beautifully said. Beautifully said. You know how to walk the talk as an Oz historian, that's for sure. So speaking of your collection, though, I think how old were you when you joined the International Wizard of Oz Club? Was it eight?
I was 9.
Nine. Okay. So talk a little bit about what that was, why you joined at that age, and then what was the impact that that had on your life?
So at 9 years old, I got my first collectible. We had just gotten a computer that had internet access as well. So, like, all of these things happened at once. And of course, the first thing I wanted to use that computer for was doing research about the Wizard of Oz. And in doing research about the Wizard of Oz, I discovered the International Wizard of Oz Club, which was an organization established in the 1950s that had connected Oz fans all over the world. And it was the first time that it occurred to me that I was not alone on the island of people who were obsessed with Oz. And so I sent away for their brochure. I got the brochure in the mail and, the thing you send away with the check to get your first Baum Bugle, which is their periodical. I was just like, wow, it was an eye-opening moment of it's not just me, because nobody in my immediate life was as obsessed with Oz as I was, not at school, not at home. So to find out that other people not only loved Oz as much as I did, but also collected like I did was so exciting.
And how did that then lead to where you're at now? I mean, we can literally see on the screen, but I mean, anyone who's followed your TikTok, this is like a tip of the iceberg that we're seeing of what the room actually is. So,
Yeah.
how did that lead to kind of the collection that you have today?
There's a famous Oz collector, Willard Carroll, who says that, it begins on a shelf and before you know it, it's a corner and then it's a room and then it's your whole house. And that's kind of how it happened for me. As a kid, I was the easiest person to shop for at the holidays and for my birthday because just get her something Wizard of Oz related, she'll be happy. And that's how it started snowballing out of control. And then anytime I had any spare cash on hand, whether it be from a gift or what have you, I knew exactly where it was going. And the day eBay became a thing was like life changing. Collectors and eBay. Every spare dime I had, I invested in the collection. And, everyone gave me gifts. My family and friends have contributed so much of what you see.
Oh, it's amazing. Like there'll be TikToks that pop up on my feed of you and the stuff that you're pointing out. It's the obscure Oz stuff right down to like just copies and copies of the very popular stuff. Like you really do have it all. And then that probably is just the tip of the iceberg for you in terms of what it could be, you know?
Oh, and my collection is not even close to the largest Oz collection in the world. Not even close.
Exactly.
So, picture this times 10 for some of these collectors. It's a passion. It's a labor of love. And this is almost 30 years in the making at this point.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, talk a little bit about starting the Oz vlog in I think it was 2007-ish.
Yes.
So talk about like starting it then, what it was like in those early days. Because I believe, did you start on YouTube or was it a blog?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
so this is early days YouTube, 2007, as we can all kind of vaguely remember. Talk about what it was like then versus how that audience has just grown to what it is now.
YouTube was brand new. This was before Google had acquired it. It was kind of the wild west of video posting. And I was bored the summer before I left for college, and I decided to just record a little video of my Oz collection and post it. Totally forgot about it, went off to school. And when I came home, I had dozens of messages from people like, oh my gosh, I do this too. I can't believe there's somebody else out there who collects Wizard of Oz things. And, started posting more regularly and built a lovely little community on YouTube. And then the pandemic happened and TikTok became a thing. And I downloaded TikTok. And again, the one thing I really know how to talk about quite well. And at this point, the YouTube channel had led to, speaking on panels and going to
Mm.
conventions. And, I had gained, notoriety within the Oz community. And, one of my videos in the very early days went mega viral. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, not only am I connecting with Oz fans, but I'm connecting with people who want to learn more. And what an amazing educational opportunity this is. And it just skyrocketed from there.
And I'm sure like with TikTok, what must have just like opened your doors and is that interaction with audiences, right? The fact that you can literally respond to comments with a video, so you can answer these questions and debunk these myths. I know you do that pretty well every other day.
Yeah.
So it really is an incredible platform for that. With that though, this has led to some incredible opportunities for you, particularly in the last 2 years. And I definitely just want to touch on the Wicked press tour. How did that come about? Talk to me about what that experience was like, and specifically, of course, not only did you sit down with Ariana and Cynthia Cynthia, but Ariana is a fan of yours, and you're mentioned in the commentary on the DVD of part one of Wicked. Talk about being a part of the legacy in that way.
Yeah, in 2023, there was a little snippet in Town and Country magazine of, guesses of who would be invited to the Wicked premiere. And I'd been covering, the production, the behind the scenes, like everything that popped up online I was covering and the casting and whatnot. And they mentioned my name as a possible invitee to the premiere. And I called everyone I knew and I sent a copy to my grandma and I was so excited just to be mentioned. I was like, this isn't going to happen, but my God, how cool. And in 2024, I got an email from an exec at Universal who asked to meet with me and said, would you be interested in interviewing John Chu? And of course, the answer was, oh my God, yes. So we had a meeting and this lovely gal and her team was also speaking with my dear friend Tiffany Sutton, who's
Yep.
at Follow the Yellow Brick Girl. And I said, they said, oh, we see that you've met her before. I said, yeah, we're real life close friends. They said, would you be interested in doing this together? And we were like, yes. So we were scheduled to tentatively interview John Chu in the summer of 2024 before the premiere of the first film. As we got closer to that, they added a couple of more interviews. They're like, hey, Ethan Slater and Marissa Bodie are going to be, available. And hey, would you be interested in interviewing Steven Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman? And we were like, yes. And then Jonathan Bailey was going to hop in the interview with John Chu. And we are like, whoa, this is spiraling. And
Yeah.
but they made a point of saying, listen, Cynthia and Ariana, they are hitting with the big news outlets. They're slammed. Not going to happen. We were like, of course, we were relative nobodies, NBC, ABC, all these major outlets were there. We were sitting waiting to interview Ethan Slater and Marissa Bodie. We'd had a lovely chat with Marissa Bodie's dad, who is so unbelievably proud of her.
My dad was out there geeking out because he loves both of you guys.
We just had a lovely conversation.
Of course, Sean Bodie loves to talk for sure, and I love that about him.
We're sitting there waiting to go in, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Ariana Grande walk out of one of the other booths because they had sectioned off a soundstage, and everybody was interviewing at the same time. And I turned to Tiffany and went, oh my gosh, look, it's Ariana Grande. And when I turned back, she was running at a gallop towards us with Cynthia Erivo hot on her tail. And we were like, and they came over and gave us big hugs and said, oh my gosh, it's so nice to finally meet you. And we talked for a few minutes and they were like, so we'll see you guys later, right? And we're like, you know what? We could, your schedules were so busy, but we're so glad to have met you. At which point Ariana Grande was like, are you out of your effing gourd? And they both turned to their lovely group of assistants and they're like, well, we'll make it happen. And we're like, what does that mean? And we went in and did the interview with Ethan Slater and Marissa Bodie, which was magnificent. And when we came out, there was a lovely gal with a clipboard who said, okay, Ariana and Cynthia are ready for your interview. And we were like, what interview? Because of course we hadn't written one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're totally unprepared.
Totally
Oh my
unprepared.
God.
So in the 2 minutes it took us to go from one soundstage to the other, Tiffany and I wrote an
Oh
interview
my God.
on the back of a golf cart.
Okay.
And we did. It was one of those make it work moments.
Yeah, well, I honestly, I watched the interview. You would never guess. So you guys pulled it off.
Margaret Hamilton,
Yes.
Mabel King, Idina Menzel,
You had to do it, didn't
and
you?
now Cynthia Erivo and Billy Burke, Lena Horne, Kristen Chenoweth, and now Ariana Grande. Tell me, what does that evoke for you? This is one of the lovely things about Tiffany. She's such a pro. She's been modeling and doing this for years. I'm relatively new to this sphere. And so she's so confident and so easy with everything she does. So I was clinging to her confidence and like, please let me absorb some of your energy today because I was terrified, truly.
Toss, toss.
Lovely.
Beautiful.
Very new.
Toss, toss.
Word.
She did.
Oh, yeah, the
Ooh,
shade.
I loved it.
But they're also so kind and they put you so at ease. Like, people always say, like, are they really like that in real life? Like, my experience was yes. And they didn't have to do that. They hadn't had a break all day, barely had time to use the bathroom or grab a bite to eat or have a drink of water. And they carved out time to talk to us.
But you know what it speaks to? It speaks to their love of Oz and
Yes.
the material because they knew the people to really talk to about that stuff. Because, yes, the big media outlets are what they are, but it's going to be kind of your run-of-the-mill press junket. But, the real meat of the material was going to be you guys, and they knew that.
The Ozian lore is something everyone in this room loves very
Yes,
dearly.
Very much so, yeah.
I feel like my shelves at home look a little bit like your shelves at home.
And that was the loveliest thing about Wicked and Wicked for Good and the PR campaigns because they didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It's not like we were such a big interview. They couldn't pass it up for their careers. It was like, they wanted to engage with the fandom in a way that was really unique to Wicked. And I'm so grateful to have been a part of it, even in a small way. It was outrageously cool.
That was a little Liza Minnelli there. I
Oh,
feel like
thank you.
a little impersonation there. So speaking of other cool things, there's a documentary out on Peacock. It's Dorothy, and you speak a little bit about your involvement in that and how that came to be.
Yes. So before all of the Wicked took off, in 2023, Jeffrey McHale, the director, reached out and said, "Hey, I'm doing this project. I want to do a documentary about Dorothy and her impact on pop culture as a character. And I'm going to interview women who've played Dorothy in the past. And I need some, historians and content creators to do voiceover. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yes, sign me up." So I went into a studio, he asked me lots of questions. He captured organic responses. And this just speaks to his editing because the film is so seamless and everything sounded scripted, but none of it was. All of
Mm.
it was just it was prompt questions that led to answers.
Really? Okay. I
Yes.
would have thought like what you did was scripted. Absolutely.
Not
Okay.
even a little bit. No, he was
Okay.
so, and that just speaks to his skill
Yeah.
as a filmmaker because he was able to mine this incredible film from people's organic responses. Taking innocent things and twisting them into something less innocent is something that we really love to do in the internet age.
Ever since I was a little girl, I wanted ruby slippers.
He interviewed the likes of Ashanti and Shanice from The Wiz Live and Danielle Hope from Andrew Lloyd Webber's production and Fairuza Balk and just like having my name in the credits with these amazing women that I admire so much was so incredible. And it premiered at Tribeca last year, and I got to bring my daughter as my plus one.
Oh, amazing.
And it was just it was one of those like really incredible moments because she was so excited and proud and gained a few mom points because she got to walk her first red carpet before before even being a teenager.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, your daughter's gonna look. How old is your daughter right now, if you don't
She's
mind me
12
asking?
now.
She's 12. So I mean, she's at the age where she would start looking back at the last like 5 years of your career and going like, man, my mom's impressive. Like
Oh,
this,
I
this
owe
is really
Ariana
good
Grande
stuff.
and Cynthia Erivo some mom points too because she had a bully in elementary school who came up to me when I went to pick her up after school and was like, "Rosa says you know Ariana Grande." And I was like, "I do. Here's a photo of us together." So thank you.
Perfect, perfect.
Mom points forever.
Doesn't get any cooler. So speaking about you being a historian and kind of your skills being used that way for the documentary, let's go back in time a little bit and talk about Oz and all the fun stuff around that. I think what's really interesting, and you've talked about this in the past, is we're seeing so much Oz material coming out lately. There's a little bit of a resurgence with that. It's kind of been that way since the beginning, hasn't it? Like L. Frank Baum adapted his own work in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about how he was doing that, like with the stage play?
Yeah, he was a revolutionary in the way that he adapted and readapted his own books. And, the thing about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the book he published in 1900, which is from which all Oz derives, he hadn't intended it to be a series or for it to go any further. He had had some, mild successes with his first couple of publications. He had done a book called Mother Goose in Prose and Father Goose His Book. And then he took these stories that he'd been telling his five sons and their friends and put it all together in this tome. And it was a mega hit. It sold out its first printing in a month and then the second printing immediately after. And so he then decided, because he had worked his way through theater. That was one of the many things he did in his life. He was a performer and a writer. He decided that this would translate beautifully to the stage. And his original intention had been to adapt it pretty close to the novel. But his partners were like, nah, you know what we need? Musical extravaganza for adults, because they're the ones that buy tickets. So it turned into this adult musical romp that does not resemble the novel in any way. There is a cow instead of Toto. This is where the poppies and the snow that wakes them up originates from. So there are ideas in there that we still see in the Oz fandom today. It's completely, almost completely lost to time. Almost no one knows about it or knows the music. Sheet music still exists. But, it's really hard to piece together exactly what it was. There are some great books about it, but it was wildly different. And Baum kind of set the tone for creatives feeling comfortable taking artistic license with Oz and the fact that it can adapt in so many different ways. And then, he kept getting bombarded with letters from fans like, I must know what happens next. And so he's like, well, I guess I'll write another one. And then another one and another one. And by book 6, he got pretty sick and tired of writing about Oz and wanted to do other things. And so he cut Oz off from all civilization and then went bankrupt and was like, retcon, let's get back into it, and published Oz books until the end of his life. And then other authors took up the mantle and became the other royal historians of Oz. And we now have over 40 canon Oz books.
It's also just fascinating that, because people have talked about the difference of the movie versus the novel. That's true to character in a way of what Baum was doing from the very beginning. But one that is very true to the source material is, as you've spoken about numerous times, Return to Oz. And for those of us of a certain generation, that's, a horror film that rivals The Exorcist in some regards. But it's also very, very much honest to the source material.
Yes.
With that being said, I would almost love to personally see an adaptation of all the books in that style. Are there aspects of Oz that you would like to see adapted in a certain way that you haven't seen done yet?
There have been a few adaptations that have gotten very close to what I would love to see. I think Emerald City, the NBC Game of Thrones version of The Wizard of Oz, got very close because they tackled the Ozma character, who is a trans icon today. Her character was transformed. Spoiler alert for the books, everybody. Her character was kidnapped by the wizard, given to a witch, transformed from a little girl to a little boy, raised as a little boy, and then rediscovers the woman within. And so obviously it's not a one-to-one metaphor, but a lot of trans women have, held Ozma up as an icon. Emerald City was really the one show that I've seen that really tackled that theme. And I would love to see more adaptations do that, and the complexity and the gender fluidity of all the characters in Oz. And, the friend of Dorothy trope, really dips back all the way to the books, in which Dorothy's friends were really gender fluid, and there's lots of suggestions of homosexual relationships. Obviously, nothing very explicit. It's all there in the text. So very interesting. It's just so ahead of its time, and I would love to see a series take on those books in that way.
It's interesting that you bring that up because obviously, yeah, Friends of Dorothy it has been a thing, but it's almost sometimes just talked about on the surface level of like, oh, well, it's because of being an outsider and like all that kind of stuff. But hearing you speak to that, it's actually much deeper.
So much credit must go to the LGBTQIA plus community for propping up the Oz fandom as much as they have throughout history.
Yeah.
Without them, I don't know if we would still be aware of these works. So I'm so grateful for all the work that has been done by that community to keep Oz alive.
Speaking of different things about Oz that are people might not be aware of, you've got a statue somewhere on your shelf that is the Scarecrow and Dorothy in a little embrace.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is actually even maybe referencing in sort of the original film as well, and just some of the stuff that's not picked up on today with that?
Yes. So in the book series, Dorothy and the Scarecrow have a very close bond, but it's really a brother-sister relationship, just because they knew each other the longest. And MGM was attempting to use this film as a vehicle for Judy Garland's career. And the original thought was to give her a very innocent romance, like a romantic subplot, in which she and his Kansas counterpart, Hunk, would have a relationship that would translate into some of the Oz scenes in a very innocent way, nothing explicit. In some of the early script treatments, Dorothy and the Scarecrow are very much that bond, and it translates in Kansas to Hunk leaving for college at the end, and Dorothy, they agree to write to each other and they have a tearful goodbye, and it's very suggestive that down the line they're going to end up together. Well, of course, they aged Dorothy back down before the film was finalized, before that final script was done. They took off this long blonde wig that she was going to wear. She had originally had a lot of makeup. They took all that off, and she was supposed to be 12 years old in the finished film. I don't think that translates at all. I think she still very much looks 16, but she was supposed to be 12. But because of that original script treatment, there's still a couple things that snuck through. And at the end, Dorothy says,
I think I'll miss you most of all.
And that was a holdover line from that original subplot. So yes, the cookie jar is very controversial because depending on what angle you look at it from, it looks quite suggestive. At the end of the day, you can certainly read this as a ship if you wish, or as an innocent friendship, brother-sister relationship, what have you. That if you got the sense that they're a little shippy with each other, You're not crazy. It's definitely there.
I always think of there's the Family Guy spoof of that where they people I'm gonna miss you most of all, and the others are
And
like,
you're like,
oh,
whoa,
oh,
wait a minute.
okay.
Goodbye, Tin Man.
Goodbye, Dorothy.
Goodbye, Lion.
Goodbye, Dorothy.
And I think I'll miss you most of all, Scarecrow.
Oh, okay. It's kind of an odd thing to say.
Yeah, sort of a weird comment right in front of all of us.
Kind of thought this was a team effort.
Yeah.
Around that time, though, that switch, that age switch happened, there was actually a director switch up, I think. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, there were 5 total directors
I
assigned
didn't
to
know
The
that.
Wizard of Oz.
Okay, I only knew the 2, so please, yeah.
Yeah, so first was Norman Tarog, who was assigned he was the first person assigned. He didn't actually shoot any of the film. He did a lot of pre-production, but pre-production was taking so long for that era because they pumped out films very fast. So he had already moved on to another project. So then they brought in Richard Thorpe, who is the director who had Dorothy. They called her the Lolita Dorothy. Long blonde hair, heavy makeup, tight dress, and this more adult subplot. And they had to break after 11 days of filming because Buddy Epson was poisoned by his aluminum powder makeup. And during that break, Mervyn LeRoy, the producer, looked at what they had shot so far and hated it. So they fired Richard Thorpe and they brought on George Cukor, who was about to start Gone with the Wind, but he had a couple of weeks free and he took off all the makeup. He redesigned the look. He redesigned some of the sets. They cast Jack Haley and he reminded Dorothy, "You're just a little girl from Kansas," because she was playing this very Hollywood actress because she loved the blonde. She loved feeling glamorous. Poor Judy had never felt glamorous before. But he reminded her to remember that she was a little girl from Kansas and really be genuine, be authentic. And then he left to direct Gone with the Wind, and Victor Fleming came in. Now, he shot most of the film, and he's the credited director on the film. But George Cukor and Clark Gable had a huge falling out, and Clark Gable was very good friends with Victor Fleming and demanded that they get him Victor Fleming to finish Gone with the Wind. So Fleming left to finish Gone with the Wind, and they brought in King Vidor, who finished the film and directed all of the Kansas sequences, including Over the Rainbow. And he kept completely quiet about it until Victor Fleming's passing. He never said a word, didn't want any credit for it, but he shot some of the most key scenes in the film. And yeah, somehow, with 5 directors, dozens of script treatments, and writers, we somehow got this perfect film.
I was gonna say it's really cohesive for that amount of meddling from everybody, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't normally get that. Normally, you get a very fragmented.
Directors had less creative control at this time. They were really carrying out the vision of the producer. So Mervyn LeRoy really shaped the film to be what he wanted it to be. And it was his pitch to Louis B. Mayer in the first place. So it was really a passion project for him. And he guided these 5 directors.
One thing that you do so incredibly well online, I mentioned briefly, is the debunking of myths. And we can honestly spend like a whole couple hours talking about that. We're not going to. But I wonder if we could talk about kind of the more famous stuff that is talked about with The Wizard of Oz and just that era in general. And that's like the abuse of Judy Garland and where that's maybe inflated or over exaggerated at different parts and where it's actually quite honest and accurate. Can you talk a little bit of your knowledge around that?
Yeah, Judy Garland had a difficult life. And, there were parts of it that were tragic, which a lot of people know about. And that has unfortunately become conflated into everything she's ever done is tainted with that tragedy. And that's just not the truth. At this point in her career, Judy Garland was not a household name. She was not the big star. They purposefully picked this project for her to elevate her because at this point she had done a lot of radio and a lot of smaller parts and she was popular with crowds, but she wasn't that big star. And that's what they wanted for her. And she was thrilled to get cast as Dorothy and loved the experience. And it was a happy time in her life. And her children have talked about that a lot in public, about this misconception that The Wizard of Oz, I've heard so many people say Oz killed Judy Garland, and that's so not the case. If anything, Ethel Gum, her mother, killed Judy Garland because she started her on amphetamines and barbiturates at the age of 10 or 11 years old, doing 8 shows a day in vaudeville. The Wizard of Oz was a happy time for her and one that she cherished, and she was very protective of that film and its memory. So yeah, please rest assured, when you're watching The Wizard of Oz, you're watching one of the highlights of Judy Garland's life. I think one of the other, of course, huge myths that we hear all the time is that someone took their own life on the set, which is
Oh yeah, I honestly I wasn't even going to bother, but
absolute
go for it.
malarkey. Let me give comfort to your listeners. No one did that. And if you need to know why, go check out my hundreds of videos on the topic.
Yeah, quite literally, you have a playlist, like, and you do it so politely and so kindly, like you're stitching other people's videos because there is so much misinformation out there.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this was a time in film when there really was no oversight. There was no one watching what they were doing. And women especially received the brunt of very abusive behavior and very inappropriate behavior when working in this sphere because there was nobody watching to see what was going on. And there was no regulation. So Judy Garland's experience in Hollywood was not a unique one. And this is why we see so many of these tragic Hollywood stories because it's part of the Hollywood culture that we're still contending with now. This is not something we've beaten back. If anything that we can derive from Judy Garland's story, she experienced a lot of joy in her life, along with a lot of the tragedy. And I think to do her life service and to do her memory service, it's really important to remember the highlights of her life as well, and to share her craft and her genius with the coming generations.
All right, Tori, I want to talk a little bit about the technical aspects of Wizard of Oz and also just kind of the reaction when it first came out. But before we get into that, like it was groundbreaking in so many ways, also for its use of Technicolor. Can you talk a little bit about what is specifically three-strip Technicolor, but the use of Technicolor in the film as well, what that was for the time?
I can talk about it in a pretty rudimentary way. It used three colors to translate all other colors, is what I understand. And they required a ton of light. It required, and not all colors translated exactly. So, they really had to do a lot of color testing before The Wizard of Oz began to see how the colors they were choosing would translate on film. So the ruby slippers, for example, the reason they're red is because because in the book they're silver. They really wanted to show off this Technicolor technology and have those shoes pop because silver against yellow wouldn't read very well. And a lot of the decisions they made for Oz were because of the Technicolor technology. But the shoes, if you see them in real life, they're more a maroon color than they are ruby red. And it's because with the light hitting them, they read ruby red on film. And Margaret Hamilton, in fact, was made green because her white skin against the black dress made this kind of halo of white around her neck that made her look like her head was kind of floating on its own. And so the contrast was needed to make her look, because they really wanted her all in black. And so the contrast was needed to make her read properly. And so many of those great decisions were made from this technical perspective.
And I should say and point out, what color those shoes are because you have seen them in person and
Yes,
held them.
I
If I'm
held them.
not mistaken. Yeah.
That was terrifying.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
said, hold out your hands and pretend you're holding two baby birds that if you move, will die. And I was like,
Yeah. Also, I know also you've a couple times gone to see the Wizard of Oz at the Sphere. And, I know there's some controversy around that, the technology involved with that. But I also think it's kind of, again, true to the source material in the sense that in 1939, when this came out, the way it would have blown people's minds with the technology at the time. Like, I can only imagine what that first moment was when the door opened for people seeing it for the first time. It would have been unreal.
yeah, I've heard that some audience members, when they came in and saw the sepia tone, were a little disappointed because it had been billed as this great Technicolor, achievement. And, then that door opened and it all made sense. It's still, when you think about the fact that they had no CGI and everything you see was done practically, is still mind-blowing in my opinion. Just the way that they achieved, because they were inventing the wheel as they went. And the things they were capable of doing just with their own ingenuity is just mind-blowing and so inspiring.
It's one of those untouchable films in a way, in the sense that I think it's a very dangerous venture to try and remake it exactly in the sense with with its even just the musical numbers and everything like that. You can do different adaptations, I think, but to touch the Wizard of Oz as it is, it's a pretty special piece, right?
It's very special, and no remake will ever diminish it. But I disagree with the fact that it's untouchable.
Okay, let's go. Yeah.
I think it should be remade over and over. If you don't remake old works, what happens to them? They become that old movie that no one engages with anymore because they're not of their time. There's no people of color
Yeah.
in The Wizard of Oz. We have The Wiz, of course, but there are lots of audiences that would love to see more diversity in Oz, and I think Wicked has certainly achieved that. But there's also a couple of things in there that are very questionable. There's a mention of the Hottentots in the Lion's song, "If I Were King of the Forest." So, it needs a revamp, and I would be very open to seeing what somebody could do now. It will obviously not be the same, and it will obviously not be as groundbreaking because it won't be using the same techniques, but I would love to see what a contemporary hand could do with it.
But you know what I appreciate that with you is that you are so always open to things like that. And because a lot of times when people are super fans of various things, they're purists as well in that sense. And you said a very, very key thing there, right? Which is that a remake would never diminish the original. And I think that's the thing that everybody needs to remember whenever there is a remake or a redo or reboot is the common word as well, is that you will still always have the original. It'll always be on your shelf. It is what it is.
And if anything, a remake drives more people to go back and see the original if they haven't already, and to maybe pick up the books. As a matter of fact, I went to the Sphere a couple weeks ago, and in the elevator at the hotel on the way back up to our room, ran into somebody who had been at the same showing as us, and it was their first time seeing The Wizard of Oz at all. And they couldn't wait to go home and watch the original in its original format. And so there's one more person who discovered Oz because of something new that a lot of people are very wary of, and with good reason. AI is something we should all be wary of. But, there is a net positive to be mined there that we should remember as well.
When it first came out, even with it being such a groundbreaking thing, it's coming out at a very precarious time in history. It did not make profit for a little bit until I want to say 10 years later. Can you talk a little bit about that re-release and just the time period of it coming out and when it kind of then found its audience?
This is another myth because, the popular myth is that it wasn't a hit upon its release because it didn't turn a profit. But MGM was actually much less focused on this film turning a profit. Every year they had what they called a prestige movie or two that were meant really to show off their technological prowess and their artistic prowess and to drive a career. And so this movie was made with those intentions, to drive Judy Garland's career and to show off their technological capabilities on their lot, to show that they were the lot with the most star power and the most talent. And they did that. They achieved that. It was very popular. There were lines around the block at the releases. Judy Garland and Ray Bolger and Burt Lahr and Mickey Rooney all got up on stage and introduced the film and did little musical numbers. And yeah, it was wildly popular. It didn't turn a profit until its 1949 re-release, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that it didn't debut in Europe the way it would have done if World War II was not ravaging through Europe. It was seen in the UK and it was seen in France, but it also had plans it was supposed to be released in Italy. It was supposed to be released in Germany. In 1949, Italy got its first release of The Wizard of Oz. And that's when it finally turned its profit. But by then, Judy Garland was a major star and MGM was flourishing. And, MGM had an investment interest that year in Gone with the Wind as well. So they were not hurting, and that lack of profit didn't do anything to deter them from their goal for this film, which it absolutely achieved.
An interesting parallel, I think, with The Wizard of Oz coming out in 1939, when the world is taking a turn towards fascism, nosediving into fascism at that point, and then Wicked coming out in 2020. Full disclosure, you and I are other sides of the border. I'm Canadian, you're American. We're all aware kind of what you folks are dealing with and what the world is going through. Talk a little bit about how Oz in general, because yes, Wicked is definitely has this anti-fascist message. Wizard of Oz has this anti-patriarchal message as well, and specifically the novel a little bit. So speak a little bit about the impact of that at this time.
Yeah, so in the novel, the wizard is even more nefarious than he is in the film. He says it's an emerald city, and he makes all of the citizens permanently wear green glasses so they think everything they're looking at is emerald, but it's not. He, like I said, kidnapped a baby, deposed a king. Not a nice guy. He gets a redemption arc in later books because fans kept writing to L. Frank Baum like, we want the wizard back. And Frank Morgan is so charismatic and affable. I think his nefariousness gets lost a bit in translation, but he's not the good guy at all. And his advice at the end is terrible advice and was written on purpose to be all the wrong advice. The witch at the time, contemporaneously, was compared to Hitler. There was a political cartoon in the Utica Dispatch of the Wicked Witch as Hitler dressed as the Wicked Witch, and, the flying monkeys and so on and so forth being labeled different countries. So that metaphor was pretty immediate and very recognizable. And when you look at The Wizard of Oz now through our contemporary lens, Dorothy's journey becomes even more important. She is a young woman dropped into this crazy situation, completely lost, turned upside down, but she doesn't give up hope. She keeps walking. She assembles her family of friends, her found family. The people at home are not people who see her value. And she leaves her small town and goes out into the world and achieves self-actualization on this journey where she defeats her wicked witch and, battles those flying monkeys. When I watch The Wizard of Oz today and when I watch Wicked today, I find so much strength and inspiration in those stories. And I think they're very applicable to what we're experiencing now.
I've seen Wicked a ton because I was actually an usher at a theater here in Toronto. So I'm maybe I don't know how many times you've seen Wicked,
You've
but
probably seen it more than me.
I'm up at like 53.
Yep, you beat me.
So and the first time I saw it was like 2014 or something like that. So it was really interesting actually for me seeing the movie through a different lens. And I know there was criticism, as there always is whenever a piece of media suddenly tackles anything remotely political, of it becoming quote unquote woke. Or wicked was being woke, and and the fact is, no, it's always been, or it always was woke, if we want
Oh,
to
yeah.
take that spin that way. Yeah.
All the way back to L. Frank Baum, Oz has always been woke, has always been about celebrating difference and inclusivity. And the people of Oz, the citizens of Oz, the more different they were, the more valued they were because they brought something new. And one of my favorite quotes from the books is, "Variety is the spice of life, and we have enough variety among us to keep us content." That's an inaccurate quote. I don't think that's exactly what it was, but something to that effect. Winnie Holtzman, who wrote the book for Wicked the musical and also co-wrote the screenplay for the films, was asked if she had altered the story to make it fit the political moment, and the answer was no. Nothing about Wicked changed. It just is such a universal idea that it translates to pretty much any time. No matter, turning your lens to different parts of the world, the story applies pretty much at every time period since the beginning of man. So, when Gregory Maguire wrote Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, he wasn't talking about Trump, but he was talking about fascism, and he was talking about what we were seeing in the Middle East, and he was talking about, Vietnam, and he was, all of this applies. And, Stephen Schwartz specifically mentioned, the oppression of the LGBTQIA plus community in the early 2000s when adapting it to the musical. And it just continues to translate, and great works do that. The Wizard of Oz continues to survive because, like Shakespeare, it can be applied in any time period with any group of characters, but those themes are so universal that we will always see ourselves in them.
On that note, are there, for anybody listening, are there specific storylines or Oz storylines that you would recommend, especially just in this precarious time where everything is feeling very, very tense? You mentioned Ozma. Like, are there things you would kind of direct people to go, or specific books in the series, or just the series as a whole?
I would recommend the series as a whole. There are some books that are kind of more meandering, where they're kind of just experiencing whatever weird place they're in. And then there are books with deep plots that really touch on things that are still very important. And so, like, all of that put together, it's a very stress-free read, but it brings a lot of meaning. And so I would recommend the series as a whole if you have time. And they're great reads for bedtime because they're easy reads and they're short chapters. And I read them to my daughter when she was little, and now she's rereading them on her own.
I want to talk a little bit about, just before we wrap things up, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the music of The Wizard of Oz. Can you talk a little bit about who came on to compose the music originally, and who brought, we talked a bit about Over the Rainbow, but bringing the music to life?
That was Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg, who wrote the score and the songs for The Wizard of Oz. And they were Broadway guys. They were very sophisticated in their writing style, integrating lyrics with music and really making it not only just random songs, which had been popularized in the early 20th century, just musical reviews. They used their music to drive the narrative, which was a relatively new idea at the time. And there was some fear that their music was too sophisticated for moviegoers because, of course, theater was high art and movies were, for the masses. But their lyrics to this day are dizzyingly clever. I mean, when you listen to We're Off to See the Wizard and how those lyrics just bounce and make you want to dance along with that tune. Just brilliant.
We did a duet on TikTok, and I think about that of the specific moment in the song.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, no joke. These alliterations are way harder than they look. Here we go. It really was no miracle. What happened was just this.
It really was no miracle. What happened was just this. The wind began to switch, the house to pitch, and suddenly the hinges going to unhitch. Just then, the witch. I mean,
Yeah,
Come
and it's
on.
catchy, and yet it's still catchy. Like you find yourself repeating it over and over and over again, right?
It's a musical stim. It's like so satisfying.
Yeah, but you bring up an interesting point too, just about the music in general and how, going back just over the history of the film score, The Wizard of Oz is one of the, and I would argue, somewhat underrated ones to look at. The Wizard of Oz really does tell its story through the score, which is sweeping throughout. It's not just the songs; it's a pretty constant, moving character throughout, which is really wonderful, you know?
It's such a shame that it stops being a musical halfway through because there were deleted songs that were meant to be in the third act that got cut. So we missed out on the Jitterbug and the reprise of Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead and the reprise of Over the Rainbow. But, yeah, after King of the Forest, it usually blows people's minds when I say this, like, that's the last song in the movie.
And it's not the only, Frozen did it X
Yeah.
number of years later, right? So it's not the only hit movie to forget that it was a musical halfway through. But yeah, Tori, thank you so much for doing this. You are absolutely like I'm blown away by your TikTok, but to actually speak with you and hear your knowledge, we have not done a pre-interview at all. You've not seen my questions. You really are an expert in your field. So congratulations and thank you for talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to finally connect.
All right, we'll talk soon, Tori. Have a good one.
Bye.
Okay, no joke, these alliterations are way harder than they look. Here we go. It really was no miracle. What happened was just this. The wind began to switch, the house to pitch, and suddenly the